Hey, if you're someone who's been waiting on the sidelines for a foreclosure wave or a real estate crash to buy a property, I have a great video for you today because according to ATTOM Data's latest report, there were over 33,000 houses in foreclosure in the United States in January alone. So what does this mean for you if you're waiting on the sidelines to buy? Well, today we're going to dive into that ATTOM Data report to find out what's really going on with foreclosures and the delinquency rates. We're also going to look at 3 ways that you can buy and find foreclosures in your city. But before we get started, I want to give a special plug to Mr. Jason Walters. Jason's a fantastic guy. He lives out in Sacramento and he helps me with my YouTube editing. He actually has his own real estate YouTube channel. The link's in my description below. And I really encourage you to go check out his channel. And if you need some good video editing services, hit up Jason. He can help you anytime. First thing we're going to do is look at ATTOM's latest report on foreclosures. So the link's in my description below, but you can go to the ATTOM website anytime you want and take a look at some of their reports. Now, they do have a lot of paid information, but they put out free reports that are very informative. So the title of this article is U.S. foreclosure activity sees a notable increase in January 2024. And so I'm not going to read the whole article, but I am going to highlight a few key pieces. They basically say that today they released their January 2024 U.S. foreclosure market report, which shows there were a total of 33,270 U.S. properties with foreclosure filings in January of 2024. Default notices, scheduled auctions, or bank repossessions, that's up a whopping 5% from a year ago and up 10% from the month prior. So they also go in and talk about how many foreclosures were actually completed, meaning the house was foreclosed on and the owner had to move out and somebody else bought the property. So that we know that there are 33,000 total properties in some stage of foreclosure. Lenders repossessed 3,954 U.S. properties through completed foreclosures in January, up a whopping 1% from a year ago and up 13% from last month. The first month-over-month increase in completed foreclosures going all the way back to July of 2023. States that had at least 50 or more REOs or completed foreclosures and saw the greatest monthly increase in January included Michigan, Minnesota, California, Pennsylvania, and Missouri. States that had at least 50 foreclosures, 50, just 50, not 500, not 5,000. So their benchmark is just 50. That's it. Then they talk about the states with the highest foreclosure rates. So nationwide, 1 in every 4,236 homes had a foreclosure filing in January. So put that into context, that's like, it's not even close to 1%. You're like 0.28, 0.25, something to that nature. My rough math tells me that it's way under 1% of homes had a foreclosure filing. So let's go look back at some historical numbers from ATTOM and see how bad that really is. Because again, if you're waiting on this foreclosure wave and real estate crash, I know you probably have your eyes on foreclosures and you've seen headlines about how they're just exponentially increasing. So now we're going to look at how is the foreclosure trend going compared to ATTOM's historical data. Okay, so this report is from ATTOM as well. U.S. foreclosure activity increases from 2022, but still below pre-pandemic levels. They printed this report in January, early January of 2024 as kind of a wrap-up of 2023. But this is the chart I want you to pay attention to. So the orange line tells you the rate of foreclosure. And remember, right now we're like around a quarter or so. You'll see that in a second, quarter of a percentage point. And then the green bar shows you how many houses were actually in foreclosure during that whole year. So back in 2005, we had 532,000 homes in foreclosure in that entire year. Let's look at the great financial crisis. 2008, with the beginning, a lot of people say the beginning of the great financial crisis, 2,330,000 properties in foreclosure. The rate was a 1.84. It spiked to 2.23%. So basically 2.23 homes out of every 100 homes had a foreclosure filing. Pretty telling, right? That was 2,871,000 homes. Let's go to reality, though. We're going to look at reality now, folks. Reality tells us now We ended the year with 357,000 foreclosed filings on properties. And if you look back through history, there were only in the last, 20 years, there's really only 1 or 2 years, actually 3 total years, and they were all during the pandemic, where we had less foreclosure filings. Look at the rate now, 0.26, not even 1% of homes. So it's still at a historically low level as far as foreclosure filings. Now, if you've been paying attention to either my channel or any other real estate channel, you're going to know that our total inventory of active listings, not foreclosures, just active listings in the United States is right around 750 to 780,000 houses. Back in the great financial crisis, we had 2,871,000 homes in foreclosure, let alone how many houses were active. So right now, the number of homes that are in foreclosure are so minuscule compared to where they were historically, and certainly where it got bad back in the great financial crisis. And I just want to point that out. Again, if you're waiting on this foreclosure wave or a real estate catastrophe in order to purchase a house, and you keep saying, you know what, at the end of the day, man, I just need to wait. I don't want to buy an overpriced house. And I totally get that. And I'm not picking on you. If you want to wait for a foreclosure wave or a real estate crash or just wait, period, and you want to keep renting, that's fine. But I want to just share this data to help you understand the timeline that you could be waiting. Okay, so now we know Adam's saying, hey, right now, 33,000 homes in 1 month in foreclosure filings. That's around what, 350 or so, 1,000 homes throughout the year. My rough math tells me. And so now they're right at track of where we were last year, and definitely not where we even were before the great financial crisis. But let's look a little more deeper and look at the health of the mortgage market, because the delinquency rate is really going to show us how many people are behind on their mortgage. Not paying your mortgage will obviously lead to a foreclosure if you just don't pay it. So this is the Fred economic chart that shows you the delinquency rate of mortgages in the United States. And I want you to pay attention before the great financial crisis. So let's look at 2007, quarter one, 2.08%, meaning 2.08 homes, or about 2 homes out of every 100 homes was behind on their mortgage payments. Homeowners were behind. So 2 out of every 100 homeowners behind on their mortgage payments. And then the GFC happened. And actually, after the recession, which is really interesting, it was 11.48, meaning 11 and a half homes out of every 100 were actually behind in their mortgage payments. Pretty staggering. And that obviously led to a massive amount of foreclosures, the 2.8 million foreclosed filings, right? Then you can see it dropped and it went up a little bit right around COVID. And that's because a lot of people obviously couldn't make their mortgage payments because they were behind from being shut down from COVID. But then it obviously dropped off a cliff, and now it sits at 1.69 approximately. This means about 1.6 to 2 homeowners out of every 100 are behind on their mortgage payments. And this is still lower than before the GFC, and way lower than when the GFC was really rampant and we were at 11 homes out of every 100 homes. And look, the point is that you just have to watch trends. Now, you'll hear a lot of people dissect and want to dive into the health of the consumer, and they want to understand what's happening with credit cards, what's happening with auto loans, what's happening with reverse repo markets and whatnot. Certainly, you can dive into all that information and become, Puxatawny Phil and try to figure out what's going to happen in the future, right? And have a crystal ball. Unfortunately, that may not work all the time because a lot of people aren't economists. Instead, sometimes it's better to look at some simple data trends. So what I look at is the mortgage delinquency rate. Now, if this spikes, if the mortgage delinquency rate spikes and it goes way up vertically like it did from 2008 through 2010, you can guarantee that if that spikes dramatically, there's going to be a big change in the number of foreclosures. You're going to see the rate of foreclosures go up, filings, right? First, then you're going to see houses stay in foreclosure. Then you're going to see those start to be completed. And by the way, did you know it takes about 700 days to go through the foreclosure process now? 700 days. So again, if you're waiting on the sideline, if you're hoping for a foreclosure crisis like we had back in the GFC, you have to realize first, the delinquency rate is extremely low. We can see that here in the numbers, 1.6 to 2. So there's no sign that people are being foreclosed on at a hand over fist basis. Number two, you have a situation where uh, foreclosure filings are not up. Those are low as well. And then you have to go through the foreclosure process. If you're waiting on the sidelines to buy real estate and it's because of the foreclosure crash, you're waiting on those foreclosures to come around, you're going to be waiting a long time because if a house in your neighborhood goes into foreclosure now, it takes 700 days for that to go through the process. But at the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I contact those homeowners before it even gets to that point. So these techniques can help you too. So before we get to how I find foreclosures, I do want to point out one other thing. The amount of equity that the average homeowner has in the United States is staggering. In fact, just in 2023, the amount of equity that the United States has total in their homes gained $1.6 trillion in value and now stands at 16 trillion. In fact, the average homeowner in the United States has $300,000 of equity in their house, of which about 200,000 of that is tappable equity, meaning they can, if you look at the loan they have and you take 80% of that loan to leave 20% in equity, which is what you need usually to refinance a property, that's where they get the $200,000. So 200,000 of the 300,000 is tappable, and they have a total of $300,000 in equity. So this is the big question for you if you're waiting on these foreclosures to come around. If you have equity, you're not going to go through foreclosure typically. You're not going to do a short sale. You're going to sell your property. I'm not saying they're not going to sell it at a discount. And I'm not saying people are just not going to sell. If a recession comes and they have to sell their properties, they're going to. But to go through foreclosure when you have equity doesn't really apply usually. In the GFC, you had a ton of people with zero equity and they just walked away from their houses. Their payments were extraordinarily high because of adjustable rate mortgages. And then they ended up not making their mortgage payments and they couldn't sell the property and make anything. So they thought, what the heck, I'm just going to leave. But right now, there's a staggering number of individuals with a lot of equity. So they don't have to be foreclosed on. They're just going to sell. And so a lot of people on YouTube want to talk about the health of the consumer. They want to talk about consumer emotion and what they do. Well, I'll ask you, and you put yourself in a homeowner's shoes, or if you own a home, answer this question for me and comment below. If you have equity, are you going to just walk away from the equity and just go, just foreclose on this thing? I mean, I really want to reset the housing market for people, so I'm just going to get foreclosed on. I mean, if you're going to do that, give me a call. I'll help you before you do that. I'll connect you with somebody locally that can help you sell the thing and make some money. I mean, if you have equity, there's no reason to be foreclosed on. Okay, so now I'm going to go over a few ways I find foreclosed properties, and these can work for you too. The first two are virtually free. There is a little cost involved in actually writing the letters, but in contacting the owners. And then the third way actually does cost money to get the data. So first way I use is with tax information. So depending on the state you live in, some states won't share this data with people. Some states do. So in Ohio, where I live, as a good example, they share data. There are certain states that are called disclosure states and other states that are called non-disclosure states. Non-disclosure states, I think Texas is one of them, for instance, they do not share public information on mortgages and homeowners. They don't have it listed on public websites, but here in Ohio, you can actually look at any address, your neighbor's house, doesn't matter. And you can go onto the auditor site and actually find the information for not only the owner, but their mailing address and if they have delinquent taxes and all that stuff. So it's very valuable info. So what you're seeing now is my local county treasurer, not auditor, but treasurer site. So one of the ways you can find foreclosures and find properties that may want to sell for a discount is through the treasurer's office. What I like to do is combine driving for dollars and the tax list together. So the first thing I'll do is contact the county treasurer and ask them for a list of all the delinquent property tax addresses. And they'll actually send you a list of all the delinquent property tax owners. A lot of times these are properties that have had tax liens on them. They've owed taxes and back taxes for a while now. Some of them are newer on the list, but like in just Franklin County, where Columbus is located, when I pull the list, there's like 50,000 names on that list. So it's a huge list. They'll send it to you in Excel. It's pretty sweet. And then you can dissect it any way you want. And so one of the things I'll do is look at folks that are way behind on their taxes, like years behind, and I'll separate those. And then I'll look at the zip codes and streets that I like to buy on or invest in. And again, this will work even if you want to buy a house to live in. It doesn't have to be an investment property. So forget that part. If you want to buy a house, you're just waiting to buy one for your family, this can actually work. So look at the list, the tax list in Excel, look at who's behind the most, look at some of the areas you want to live in, and then get in your car and go out and drive those streets. Check off the properties on that list as you drive by them, because you want to make sure they exist first. You want to make sure they're real. So that's the first way I find foreclosed properties, because if somebody is way behind in their taxes or has a tax lien, a lot of times they could have a foreclosure as well. Not all the time, but a lot of times. So I go ahead and say, all right, they have a tax lien. I kind of treat that as a foreclosure, because there are tax foreclosures. That does happen. You don't pay your property taxes. At least it does in Ohio. So those can be great targets. Now, the next way that you can find a list of foreclosure properties is through a website like Zillow or Redfin. So I'm on Zillow's site right now, and I actually went to the Columbus area, but there were on Zillow, but there's only one foreclosure listed on the Columbus area. So I went to New York, and thought, hey, I wonder if there's any foreclosures in New York City. So Zillow right now has a whopping 97 houses for listed for foreclosure. Not very helpful. I mean, 97 out of how many houses are in New York City? I mean, tons, right? So this isn't that helpful either. I guarantee you the delinquent tax list for New York City is massive. So if you live in New York, comment below. I'd love to know if you ever tried to get that list. By the way, not only on the tax list from the treasurer, you can contact the city and get a list of people with code violations. Sometimes you can get a list of houses that have water shutoffs, that have had their water shut off. You know, sometimes these are vacant homes where the landlord just, left it alone and didn't do anything and didn't pay bills. And those are on the list too, and those could be good targets to contact. So we got Zillow. You can go on there and get some free data. The other thing that Zillow has that's pretty cool. So Zillow has a foreclosure center. You can see it here. And so you can click on the foreclosure center, and it actually talks about what is a foreclosure, the definition, the process, next steps, glossary of foreclosure terms, what are the types of foreclosure, a lot of free info that you can read through to get more knowledgeable about the details of foreclosures. Okay, so here's the last way that I find foreclosed properties. And this is my favorite way. This one does cost money, though, if you want to get the data, and it's a paid subscription. The name of the company is called Propstrem. The link's in my description below, but they have fantastic detailed info on properties across the United States, even non-disclosure states. You can find information, and it costs about $100 a month, so it's not cheap. But they have info that you really can't find sometimes anywhere else, including the MLS or the multiple listing service. I am a real estate agent, but I'm also an investor. And even as an agent, sometimes I'll use PropStream for data because it's more up to date and more robust a lot of times than even my local MLS. And if you truly want to find a deal, sitting around and waiting is not going to help. And even if you're sitting around and saving your money, working on your income, assets, and credit, that's all great and good. But if you really want to find a deal, if that's what's stopping you from buying, is finding a buying opportunity, this is a way you can take your success in your own hands and not just sit around and wait for some crash that actually may never occur. It could occur, but what if it doesn't? What if home prices continue to go up? Then you just waited for nothing. Doesn't matter if you have great credit if you're not going to buy a house. Now, you don't have to buy a house. You can rent for the rest of your life. That's totally cool. A lot of successful people do that. Rent, take your extra money and invest it in real estate in other ways, or invest in other things, or just keep it in the bank. It's America. You can do what you want to do. And by the way, you should never buy real estate because someone tells you to buy real estate. Buy it if it makes sense for you. If it doesn't make sense for you, just don't buy it. PropStream, you can see it on my screen right now. I looked up New York, same as I did on Zillow. Zillow had about 97 listings. PropStream comes out with 606 pre-foreclosures. Now, here's the key to contacting these owners. You really don't want to wait until the property is all the way through the foreclosure process. So what I like to use on PropStream is the pre-foreclosure filter. So at the top here, they have a filter you can drop down, and select all types of different distress points, people with tax delinquencies who had failed listings, who listed their house and it didn't work out, vacant homes, all that stuff. But I selected pre foreclosures. And when I do that, I have 606 in New York City alone. And how I do this is I click on the property and it actually gives you the mailing address and the owner's name. So this particular property has an owner on here. They live on 17th Street in New York, New York. I don't know anything about that street, but as an example, they put this info on here so you can actually reach out to the owner. So what I do on all these, if it's Zillow, if it's the treasurer, even if it's a list from Propstrem, is I create a letter. I have a letter that I hand wrote that says, "Hey, this is my name. I noticed your house on whatever street. I'd like to talk to you about purchasing the house." They don't have to respond to me. They could call me and tell me to leave them alone. That happens sometimes. Or they could say, "Hey, I'm interested in talking." You'd be shocked how many people respond to handwritten letters, especially if they're honest and sincere. Also, put your number on there that they can call you at directly. Don't put just an email address. Put your actual phone number and allow them to text you or call you. Again, be shocked how many people will reach out and give you an opportunity to talk to them. And you can find a house possibly that no one else can find, not even listed. Person may not even thought they were going to list the house, but they got your letter and thought, see what this person has to say. Or you could run into somebody who's like, "Hey, I need to sell this thing. I don't want it to go into foreclosure." Boom, opportunity for you. And so in PropStream, what I'll do is I'll actually export this list of the pre-foreclosures, and then I can scrub the list how I want to. I also combine that with driving for dollars. Again, getting in your car, driving the streets and looking for properties that may be distressed, or look at the tax list or the foreclosure list and go, "All right, that says it's a pre-foreclosure. Let me go ahead, drive by that, make sure it's real, make sure it's a building or a house that I'd actually want." You'd be shocked how many people just send letters out or mailers out that, like, real estate investors do what I do, and they have no idea if the house even exists. So they'll just send these letters out to people and addresses, and they don't even know if they want to buy their property. I always drive by and go, "Hey, is that something I want to buy?" "Yep, check it off. Okay, good for the list." So here in PropStream, you can see it actually shows you pre-foreclosure details, right? It shows you a little bit of it as far as who the attorney was, the amount of the pre-foreclosure, when it was filed. This was filed all the way back in 2008. I don't even know if it's still valid. Nonetheless, they probably had some stress though, so could still be somebody good to contact. So using this technique with the driving for dollars, driving the streets, and then looking at either Zillow or PropStream or your treasurer's office list, I combine those techniques and I find opportunities like this. This is actually a house that I purchased from using those techniques and contacted the owner. The owner was, in trouble with some they were behind in taxes, facing a tax foreclosure actually, but it wasn't in process yet. So I sent them a letter. They responded to my letter. I went out, sat down with them, and we worked out a deal. And so this is a house I purchased. You can see this is the kitchen. This is the before picture. And this is a little farmhouse out in the country outside of where I live. And I knew when I purchased the house, at first I was like, "Hey, I'm going to hold this as a rental." Then I decided, no, I'm going to flip it. This is a few years ago. And by the way, I did this when foreclosures were still very low. It wasn't like foreclosures and tax liens were like exploding. This is just a few years ago. But you could see this is like one of the rooms, just cluttered, had a lot of things in there, right? We had to get rid of. Great people, great family. They just wanted to get out of their house. Here's the dumpster I used to get rid of some of the junk. But then this is the house at the end or near the end of the project. We put a deck on, put some windows in, spruced up the outside a little bit, and then inside redid the kitchen. So this would make a great house for somebody, for a family to move into. In fact, a family did buy it and move into it, and they actually did some more renovating. But myself and my team went in and made it presentable and decent for people to live in. It's not the Taj Mahal, but it does work. Again, if you're waiting for some burning bush to come down, from sign from above to come down and show you a house that everybody else can see, by the way, on the MLS, and you think you're just going to swoop up the deal, get in your PJs because you're dreaming. You're just completely dreaming. Instead, take the success in your own hands and do what others won't do. Forget the MLS for a second. Go buckle down and find a deal yourself. Find a place for you and your family to move into. If you are not an investor and you're moving in because you want to buy a house to live in, sellers will probably give you the advantage over somebody like me, somebody like an investor, right? They'd rather sell to somebody who's going to move their family and move in and take care of the place and live there versus buy it, fix it up and sell it, or buy it and fix it up and rent it out. You can certainly do that, but sellers in general seem to like people who are going to buy it and live there. Okay, so that's what's going on with the ATTOM data and foreclosure wave. It seems like a small puddle right now, not really a wave. So how I found that opportunity with this flip was through my techniques with driving for dollars, the tax list, Propstream, using like a company like Zillow too, that I showed you today. But truthfully, there's a lot more that goes into driving for dollars and contacting the owners. And I've got 2 videos right here that you can watch, and they go over how I drive for dollars. It's an in-depth review, and it also shows you the exact method I use for writing my letters to the owners. And I would check those out right now.